Hey guys, I'm Erin and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing my January wrap up. So in the month of January, I read 11 books and I DNF'd one book. And so of those 11, 4 were fantasy, 3 were romance, 2 were mystery thriller, 1 was a contemporary, and 1 was a horror. So one thing I'm changing about wrap ups this year is I'm going to start including my DNFs in my wrap up. For whatever reason, I just didn't include them last year and I don't know why. I didn't have a reason. I just didn't. And I was like, oh, I'll just do a DNF video at the end of the year and talk about it. But then I got to the end of the year and I didn't really want to do it because I kind of DNF all the books for the same reason. And it felt like it'd be really repetitive. Just be like, here's this book I didn't finish. I thought it was boring. Here's this book I didn't finish. I thought it was boring because usually that's why I DNF something. So this year I was like, I'll just include them in my wrap-ups because I didn't really have a reason not to. And I don't DNF so often that I feel like it would unnecessarily bloat the length of a wrap-up. So, all that to say, let's start off with the one book I DNF this month. It's also probably the book I have the most controversial opinion on in this entire video. So starting off with that, and that is The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie. Yes, I know, I DNF'd The Blade Itself. I'm so sorry. This was my second time trying to read it, and my second time DNFing it. I tried to read it when I was in college and put it down after a week. And in college, I tended to stay away from longer, denser, high, adult fantasy just because I didn't read as much. I just preferred to stick to quicker, lighter reads during the school year, and then I would read more of the fantasy during breaks, or I'd stick to kind of lighter, shorter fantasy. And so I thought maybe, that was why I didn't like it the first time. I didn't remember anything about it from back then. So I didn't remember why I DNF'd it, other than I just wasn't getting into it. So I was like, maybe it's just the circumstances. Let's try it again now. Not taking classes or anything. And I just didn't like it. It's just not for me. It was cruising to its way to a 3-star, I guess, because I didn't hate it or anything. I think it was really well written. Everyone talked about Joe Abercrombie's writing, and I think everything everyone said is accurate. And I thought the characters were really well done, which is the other thing I feel like I always hear people talk about with Joe Abercrombie. It's these are all true things that I agree with. I was just so bored. I just was so bored. I just didn't care what was happening because nothing was happening. I was just so bored. And it'd been a week and a half. I think I got 40% through it, and it wasn't even a week and a half where I had little reading time because it was an ebook so I had on my phone, and let me tell you, my Reddit browsing went up that time, so I definitely had time to sit and read it on my phone, and I just never wanted to pick it up. So we DNF'd it. So I'm kind of sad about it too because I really hoped I was gonna like it this time because I really wanted to read the new trilogy and just be part of the buzz. I was getting a little FOMO for not reading the first law, but here we are, and we're gonna move past that into my less controversial opinions of the month. So the first book I finished in the month of January is The Mask of Mirrors by Carrick. I started this in December and really thought I was gonna finish in December, but did not quite. So this one I really liked. So I've been anticipating this. This is a book I was really excited for because one half of this writing duo is Marie Brennan, who wrote one of my favorite series of all time. And I'm glad I finally picked it up, even though it was very delayed. And this book follows Ren, who is a con artist who's trying to pull off the ultimate con with the help of her sister into getting herself into this influential noble family. Not noble might not be quite the right word, but influential family, affluent family in this kind of Venice-inspired setting. And she wants to get into this family just to have a place in the world, because she's from the slums. She's doesn't really have anything. So she wants to get this just to have a house and money and stuff like that. And then in addition, in this world, there's this kind of background storyline of this masked character that's a Robin Hood-esque character called the Rook. And there's some storyline going on with that, and there's other threads going on. But that's kind of just the general gist. This is also set in a fantasy Venice inspired, and a lot of the magic in this book is very inspired, very dream magic, as well as a lot of tarot card inspired magic. And I like this. I will say this book there was a lot going on in this book. I think that was just the one main thing that kind of took me longer to read it than I expected, was there was just so much information. It's the first book in a series. It's kind of long, and there's just a lot of information, and that's fine. That's pretty common, I find, with book ones in fantasy series. It's why they often get 4 stars from me, is because I had to wrap my mind around all the new information, so I don't fully love the series till book 2, kind of when I settle into it. And that's kind of how this one felt. I definitely understand why I've seen some people who reread it since their first reading talk about how much more they like it on reread, because they kind of got a handle on the politics, the magic, the new terms and stuff. But overall, definitely really enjoyed it. I'm definitely excited to pick up the sequel. I have discovered with this one that I really, really like Venice-inspired or Venetian Empire-inspired fantasy settings and politics setups and stuff. It just works for me very well. I think part of it is Venice-inspired cities means canals and boats, and we love that. I also really like the city of Venice. I've been there, and it was really cool, so I really like all that. I thought the tarot magic in this was very interesting. It was definitely a very unique kind of magic inspired by that. The one thing I didn't love is the dream magic, because I'm just not a dream sequence person in books. The first dream sequence in this, I was like, what is happening? I put the book down. I was like, fever dreams. But after the first one, the dreamy magic sequences got less fever dreamy, so I did like them a little bit better from the first one. But yeah, overall, very much enjoyed this and excited to pick up the sequel. Next up was my only 5-star and favorite book of this month, and that was A History of Wild Places by Shea Ernshaw. So this is one that I'm really not going to give you much of a synopsis on, because I think it's just better you just don't go in not really knowing much. And so here's kind of the pitch, which is there's this girl who's gone missing, this author, it's been several years, and this guy who has the gift to touch items and see the past of the item, or see into the person who owned them kind of thing, uses that power to help him as a private eye, and he gets hired to try and track down this girl. And so she disappeared into these woods, these kind of mysterious kind of woods, and so he ends up going into these woods trying to find her. So that's all I'm gonna give you, and I really loved it. I just was hooked. I thought the mystery was very gripping. Things that happen in it that I'm just not gonna expand upon was just really interesting to me. There's kind of a trope setup in this I've discovered I think I like a lot in kind of mystery thrillers that I think I want to pick up more of. Yeah, that's all I'm really gonna say about it. I just thought it was really good. Next, I read Heartbreak for Hire by Sonia Hartl. This is an adult contemporary romance about this girl who works for this company who pretty much works for women who've been wronged by men in some way, and they get revenge on that man for them. So each person specializes in a different kind of wronging. There's the one who specializes in cheaters, there's ones who specialize in I can't remember the other titles, but one was people guys who belittle women at work kind of vibe, just different kinds of that. And then one day it was 4 of them, and then the lady who runs this company hires a guy to be hired by women to get back at women. And so initially our main character is pretty put off by there being a guy being hired to get back at women, because she's this is all about empowering women, getting back at these shitty men. I think it's against our message and kind of what we stand for to be hiring men to get after women. But they end up kind of falling for each other, and that's kind of the love story. This was okay. I was intrigued by the premise because I had read a historical romance last year, Bombshell by Sarah McLean, that had a similar setup in that it's a group of women who get vengeance on men who wronged women. But in the historical one, it isn't a business. They're not paid to do it. They just take it upon themselves to get women. And then in the contemporary one, it's literally a business. This is her job. And I just think it was not as well executed in this book, this kind of setup. Part of it might be because it was a paid business, might have not helped in comparison with when I liked it with the historical one. And I think part of it too was the boss in this contemporary one was pretty manipulative herself. She preyed on these women that she hired in their lowest moments. She recruited them right after they got wronged, kind of thing. So the main character who got her heart broken, and she swoops in while she's crying at the table and was come work for me, you can get revenge on these kinds of guys. And it's it's pretty manipulative. I think that made me feel very icky about it. A lot of her behaviors made me feel icky about the business. It's in so much of the heroine's hang-ups in this book is the anger at hiring men in what she thought was this women empowering business. But because I just couldn't get behind the business, I just couldn't get behind her hang-ups either. And so that didn't work quite as well for me as far as being just get over it kind of deal. I also just thought, while the main 2 characters I thought had chemistry, I just thought the book spent a little bit too much time on side plots, and I wish she had spent just more page time developing the chemistry, a little bit more into what I think it could have been, because I definitely saw the potential there. So, it was fine. Next, I read The Ruin of Kings by Jenn Lyons. This is the first book in the Chorus Dragon series, and I read this as part of a read-along that Sarah from Voyage from Words is hosting, and I enjoyed this, but wow, is this book confusing as heck. I finished this book and was what did I just read? Like, what is happening, but like in a good way, in a way that I'm intrigued and enjoyed it, not in a this was bad kind of way. Yeah, so the gist of this book is we follow Kieran, who discovers when he's a teenager that he's actually the long lost heir to this noble family, and he gets thrust into this family's house and they're politicking, and that's kind of the overall gist. It's kind of hard to describe more because it's a very convoluted story. And so I had seen some negative reviews before picking this up, and some good ones, but I had seen some people, it's like after I purchased it, I then saw some people who like had some negative reviews, and so like kind of I hesitated picking up for a while until I saw this read along and was like, yeah, let's do it. But I get it. I understand the people who don't like it for the reasons they don't like it. It totally makes sense because, and I think the main reason I've seen at least is how confusing it is. I get it. It is. It's very confusing. And it was kind of two big reasons for that. And I think these reasons either going to work for you or not. And one of them is the storytelling method. So the way this starts off is Kieran is in jail talking to his jailer. And he begins telling his story. So we have the current storyline of him talking to the jailer. Then we have the past storyline of him telling his story. Then, after a chapter of him telling his story, the jailer says, no, you're starting at the wrong place in the story. And she starts the story a year before he does, like his story. So we're getting his backstory told in two different timelines from two different people, alternating. Like the chapters alternate, one after the other. In addition to that, so we already have 3 timelines. In addition, there's a lot of footnotes where this whole storytelling, like them sitting in the jail, has been recorded by this other party as like a record of something that happened that day. It's like, what is it? Yeah, so the very beginning is like this letter written to the ruler that says, Your Majesty, enclosed within is a full accounting of the events that led up to the burning of the Capitol. And so them telling their stories is like being written down as an account, and then the person who wrote the account, who wrote that letter, also has footnotes along this whole story. So it's very nested. And it's kind of a lot. And I get it. I totally get people that just doesn't work for. I think a lot of people read it and it's just like, felt like the author did it to be needlessly confusing. And I don't necessarily think that, because I liked it. I thought it was kind of interesting the way things were unfolded side by side like that. And also the footnotes themselves, very great. I love the voice of the footnotes. Love them. So it worked very well for me, but I totally get it, because it was not the most straightforward way to tell the story. That's definitely true, for sure. The other thing is just there's some lore in this world that involves body switching that just makes it confusing within the story itself. So even if this has been told linearly, that part also just made some of the story confusing with the body switching. You need a diagram to write out who's who when. So totally get it. Definitely get it. This was definitely a slower read than average for me because of this. But again, I really liked it. I liked Kieran, the main character. I enjoyed his story. I love the footnotes, as I said. I thought that was a great addition, and I hope they continue in the next book. And I just loved a lot of the characters. I just thought it was a really interesting story. So if you can get through those things into the story, you might like it. Next up, I read Plain Bad Heroines by Emily and Danforth, and I read this right after Rune of Kings, and this book is also a book with lots of nested stories and footnotes. So we had a theme here, back to back. So this book is a gothic horror novel, and there's story within a story within a story. So we start in the early 1900s, there's this memoir written by this young woman. And it's I think it has a lot of sapphic themes in the memoir, and so there's these girls at this boarding school who really like this memoir and form this club, the Plain Bad Heroines Club, to talk about it and bond over it. And they're pals. They're more than pals. They're not pals. They're more than pals. And they die at the beginning of the book. They die. And so that's kind of that event itself I thought was going to be much more of the story because it's mentioned in the little flap, but that part is really just the catalyst for the other stories. So then one of our stories takes place directly after those events, but following some of the staff members at this boarding school. So that's one storyline, is that storyline of the staff members and kind of how the fallout of the mysterious death affects the school and them and so on. And then fast forward to present day, this young woman, I think she was a late teenager when she wrote this, but she wrote a book about those girls' deaths. And then that book, a couple of years later, is being made into a movie. So then we follow the author, who's I think young 20s, and then the two actresses, similar age, who were been cast to play the main characters, the two who died. And so we follow them in the filming of the movie. So that's like another timeline. And then all of this is being narrated too, with the footnotes is like telling all of this story together. And then in addition, in the past, we also kind of have this underlying story that's like the story of the curse kind of story. That's kind of the root of all of it. And that story was very interesting because it was like revealed in a backwards way from you'd expect. It's like it was revealed from the end to the beginning of the story instead of the beginning to the end, which I thought was quite interesting. But yeah, so this one I enjoyed. I really like this. I really like the gothic horror kind of spooky vibes a lot. The beginning is kind of slow. I see a lot of people who complain about it being like the first 30 or 40% like doesn't matter to the story, and like they're not wrong, but I enjoyed it. The writing really pulled me in. The like overarching narrative voice like addresses the readers a lot as dear readers, and I think that just works for me well as like a narrative voice. And I enjoyed the characters, so the fact that the first 40% felt like it wasn't really doing much didn't bother me in this case. And not that nothing was happening, it just felt like the things that were happening didn't feel super important to the later story, but there were things happening. And yeah, and there was also some interesting parallels I found between our main, like modern storyline and the earlier storyline between the characters and some of their relationships with each other. And yeah, it was very interesting. I definitely am interested, I think, in trying to find more kind of gothic horror vibes with my horror books, because I definitely enjoyed that about it a lot. There's a lot of illustrations. I'm gonna be honest, the drawing, like the art style of the illustration isn't my favorite style, but I think it fits well with the book, and I enjoyed their inclusion a lot. Okay, next I read Ties of Tether by Jade Igharo, and I hated this book. This is a 1-star book. I did not like it. So I got this book a while ago when I thought it was going to be a romance. And then after acquiring it, I learned it's really not a romance, and actually the main storyline of this book is a surprise pregnancy, which is not mentioned at all in the blurb, which is questionable in the marketing team because it happens so early in the book that it's like that's the whole book, and that's really something that they should mention. So we're gonna throw it out there. That's what this story is about. And I just found from the writing felt very cliched and very melodramatic, but not in a fun way. I read melodramatic books that I think are fun because it's like they're self-aware that they're melodramatic and lean into that. It's kind of their thing, and it's kind of more of like quirky storylines and characters that work with it. This was not that. This was more serious, and it was melodramatic in a way I don't think it intended to be. I think it was intended to be serious and missed the mark, so I didn't enjoy that. And then as well, so I understand, as someone who doesn't like confrontation, that if you accidentally get pregnant from a one-night stand, it's hard to tell the person. Like, you chicken out. I get it. I totally get the whole chickening out and not wanting to tell them and being afraid to tell them, but here's the thing. That might be more realistic, but that doesn't make a good story. I did not enjoy spending the first half of this book being like, just freaking tell him already. Especially so after their one-night stand, they discover that he's her new co-worker. So they see each other frequently. It's not even like she has to like reach out to this person she doesn't talk to anymore because it's a one-night stand. But then they like hook up again, and then she hasn't told him. I'm just like, oh, so mad. So very angry at that. And then I just like the romance that was there between her and the baby daddy was non-existent. Like, there was supposed to be a romance that developed between them as they got to know each other, but it just wasn't there. There was like no romantic chemistry. It was just like some insta-lust, and that was it. So I just like wasn't even rooting for them. Like, there was a point in the story where they broke up, and I was like, yeah, that makes sense. They should be broken up. I don't see why they should be together, like, romantically. Because I don't got anything there. So, like, when you have your couple break up and, like, a romance storyline, and I'm not even rooting for them to get back together, loses the impact. So, did not like this book, unfortunately. So, the next book I read was All the Fields by Olivia Dade. This is the sequel to Spoiler Alert, and I was excited to read this one because I really like Spoiler Alert, but I did hear some mixed things after it came out, so I was, like, a little timid while I was waiting for my library haul to come in. And I think the one main thing that people were bothered by was the way the hero talks to the heroine. He uses like a bird nickname to refer to her because he finds her to be very bird-like look-wise. and it just didn't bother me at all. Like, I just didn't think it was an issue. I know some people really didn't like that, but I thought it was fine. Like, it worked, I think, because he made it abundantly clear that he meant the bird comparison completely positively, like 100%. And he even said, like, if this is insulting to you, I don't mean it that way, and I will stop. Like, tell me if this nickname bothers you, I'll stop. And she's like, no, it doesn't bother me. So I was like, that didn't bother me at all. And I loved their banter together. Like, I loved reading all their interactions, and this author really sold me on rooting for them as a couple so much. I just loved them together. They had great chemistry. I love them. The one thing that held me back from this one was kind of like with both characters, each of them had this kind of like, when we were in their perspective, each of them had this like internal thing that like was their thing that they like internally focused on, and it was like part of their character journey was dealing with this thing. But I felt like in both cases, and I'll be more specific about what each one was, but in both cases I just felt like we got browbeaten about it too much, and I was just tired of it. I think a little bit. For the heroine, it was like this constant inner debate of whether or not she was doing the right thing, and my problem with it was she was not often making these big moral conundrum judgments. And so while I think it fit with her character and with her character journey, I just wish we didn't have to hear about her debate of it's the right thing as many times, because it just got a little tired. I was like, these aren't big deals. It's not, I get it. Like, I don't know. I felt too heavy-handed. She could have done it a little bit less and still gotten the point across. I think she still could have gotten the characterization, the journey across, just doing it a little bit less. And the same thing with the hero, but his thing was he questioned a lot whether he was being too selfish. And I think it was the same thing as with her, where it fit his character very well. It made for good characterization. It fit his character journey in this book. But I think she could have had the same effect with fewer instances of us reading his internal monologue, because they just both got repetitive. And I was like, I get it, I understand. She went too heavy-handed, I think, with both of those, and that just took away a little bit from this book. But overall, I really enjoyed it. I love this couple together. Very good. Next, I read another romance sequel, and that is Electric Idol by Katee Robert. This is the sequel to Neon Gods. In this one, we have another Greek mythology-esque retelling following Psyche and Eros. And so in this one, Eros' mother is Aphrodite and Psyche's mother is Demeter, and they hate each other. And Psyche does something that sets Aphrodite like on her tail. Like, she wants Eros, who's her fixer guy, to like get rid of Psyche and kill her for what she did. So Eros decides he can't do it. He like, for the first time, he like can't go through with his orders because they kind of had a run-in, and he kind of has a soft spot for her now. And so in order to get Aphrodite to not kill Psyche, he marries her. He's like, well, if we're married, she won't kill you because, you know, you're her daughter now, blah, blah, blah. There's whole political reasons that I won't go all the way through for why they reasoned through this. And I enjoyed this. I think I like this one less than Neon Gods, but if your main complaint about Neon Gods was that it didn't have enough plot, this one has more plot. And I kind of wish it had less plot, actually. I think I liked the balance of the amount of plot in Neon Gods, and I wish we had less plot in this one to match it, but I really did like Psyche and Eros together. Overall, it was a very bingeable read, and I had a great time with it. Just didn't love it quite as much as the Hades and Persephone's dynamic in book one, but definitely looking forward to the next book. Next was a reread, and that was The Young Elites by Marie Lu. I read this book back when it first came out, and then never finished the series. Story of my life, and so I'm rereading this in an attempt to then finish the series this time, and I liked it. The first time I read it, I adored it, 5 stars, and I didn't like it quite that much. It was a solid 4-star read for me this time, which is not that surprising given that I was prime target audience for this when it came out, and I'm older now, so not completely surprised it fell down to just good. But I did really like it. It had kind of a Renaissance era vibed setting, as we established with Mask and Mirrors. That works for me. This also was a very dark fantasy, which is not something I've read a lot of in YA fantasy, and I really like that Marie Lu's going in this direction with it, and definitely interested to see where she takes it in the second and third book, how dark she goes, or if she reins it in. Definitely interested to see. And yeah, I think it's still, while not an absolute favorite today, definitely still a solid YA fantasy that's a little bit of an older YA fantasy. Next, I read Rock, Paper, Scissors by Alice Feeney. This is about this married couple who go away to this remote vacation as like an anniversary trip, kind of to like work on the relationship kind of deal. And we also kind of get the backstory of the relationship through letters that the wife wrote every year on their anniversary, wrote a letter to her husband that she didn't give him. She like wrote them and like kept them in like, I don't know, a box or something. Also, the husband has face blindness and he can't recognize faces either. That's kind of like part of the story there. And I enjoyed this. I thought the first half was a little slow, and I was enjoying it, and I was like intrigued because I had a lot of questions and I wanted to know answers. But it felt weird because it felt like the author didn't drop any like breadcrumbs to like pick up on and start putting theories together. Like, I don't even mean reveals, just like I felt like I had these questions and I had literally nothing to even guess an answer on. And maybe it's because I'm not the best in guessing mystery, thriller, twist, or whatever, and other readers might read it and be like, obviously there were breadcrumbs here and you just missed them. But I did, if there were. But the second half really picked up because I also was starting to be able to start forming some theories, and I thought the twist in this one was, it was like the ending of this was like a perfect balance of some things I'd figured out, some things I hadn't, which is like my ideal mystery thriller because I like feeling smart and surprised at the same time. And then the last book I read in January was Daughter of the Forest by Juliet Marillier. This was my female backlist fantasy book of the month, and I enjoyed this. This is a retelling of the folktale or fairy tale The Six Swans, which I was not familiar with prior to reading this. And I also believe the new book, Six Crimson Cranes by Elizabeth Lim, that came out last year, is also a retelling of the same story. So I think it'd be interesting, just as an aside here, to like read both and compare them as to how a writer writing an adult fantasy book in the late 90s, how like I guess the like fantasy, what fantasy was at the time influenced how she interpreted that fairy tale into this retelling versus how an author writing a YA retelling in the 2020s would interpret it. I just think that'd be an interesting kind of like comparison. But anyways, back to this story. So this was a historical based fantasy. Like, it was set in our world in medieval Ireland and Britain, and I was not expecting that. Apparently that's pretty common for Juliet Marillier's books, which I didn't know, that she sets them just in medieval our world, like not fantasy world inspired by, but like literally our world, which I liked. I think it worked really well, especially with this fairy tale retelling, because it made the fairy tale feel very rooted in kind of its roots. I guess like it felt very rooted to like its origins, I guess, with that setting, and I liked it a lot. I also, one thing that's kind of a background part of the story was the coexisting of the Irish paganism next to the emergence of Christianity in the world, and that didn't necessarily play a huge part in the story. It played some part, but that wasn't like the story. But I enjoyed that. That was something I enjoyed in Sister Song that I read last year as well, just kind of that juxtaposition. And I thought the writing of this worked very well for kind of a fairy tale style story, and overall I liked it. I think Marillier also did a really good job with the romance in this book. It just, compared to other aspects of the plot, it didn't have a ton of page time, which is fine. I mean, this isn't a romance book, but just compared to other plots, with its page time compared to other parts of the plot was lower, and thus I was very impressed with how well she sold me on it. She really did, and there were several scenes towards the end of it that were just deeply romantic in a way that I was just, like, afterwards impressed with how hard they hit, given how little time she had to sell the romance to me going into it. So very impressed with that, for sure. So I kind of had two hang-ups. One's minor, and I think pacing-wise, the first half was just paced very slowly and could have been shorter. This book is pretty long. It was over 500 pages, so it's not a tiny book. I just felt the first half could have been condensed a little bit. Not a huge deal, though, because I did still enjoy the world and characters, so not the worst. But the one actual hang-up I did have that I did not like was, and this is a little spoilery, was there was a rape scene, and I don't understand why it existed in this book at all. Like, I really don't. I didn't like its inclusion. I didn't feel like it had any real reason to be there. Like, once we had the rest of the book, I was like, there didn't really feel like there was any payoff to having that scene in there. And as well, it bothered me that that scene was graphic, but then when we get to later in the book, when our main character has the chance to have like a consensual, loving romantic sexual encounter, that one's fade to black. And like, I don't care as a concept whether my fantasy has fade to black or explicit sex scenes. Either is fine. But if you're gonna have a sexual assault scene and a consensual scene, it bothers me that the one that is graphic is the negative one, and you're not giving page time to explore the positive and like the loving, what it looks like to have like a loving and positive and consensual one, if you're going to explore the graphicness of the bad one. So I think they just either need to be both fade to black or both graphic, or just consensual and graphic. Like, that would be fine too. So didn't love that, and again, just don't understand why it was there. I really don't. But other than that, I did like the book. Other than that, that didn't ruin the book for me. And I definitely am interested in continuing on this series. I believe the next two are not fairy tale retellings. Like, this one starts off with that, and then those two play off of the retelling from this one versus new fairy tales. And the fairy tale itself is wrapped up in this one, so it doesn't continue the fairy tale. It just continues with where the retelling itself left off. So definitely looking forward to those. And I am definitely interested in reading more of Juliet Marillier's books. So those are the 11 books I read in the month of January. If you've read any of these, let me know what you thought of them below and what you read in January, and I will see you in my next video.